Pennsylvania may have been the second state to join the Union, but these days we rarely rank that high when compared to other states. For instance, when ranking the states by population growth, Pennsylvania is actually losing population to other states like Florida and Texas. Now, why does this even matter? Well, for one, you could find yourself paying higher taxes. As more taxpayers leave the state, your share of the tax burden actually grows. And if the population shrinks, the state economy gets weaker. If we don't reverse course, Pennsylvania could find itself in an economic death spiral. But there's hope, as we'll cover today. Pennsylvania actually has a lot going for it. And if we enact the right policies, Pennsylvania can become the leading state for opportunity and prosperity. This is Freedom Rising, and I'm Andrew Lewis. Each episode, we dive into the big issues affecting Pennsylvanians and the country at large. We have a clear point of view. We want Pennsylvanians to have more opportunity, more prosperity, more freedom. After all, Pennsylvania was the birthplace of freedom, and it can be a beacon of freedom once again. So I am joined today by Andrew Wilford. Andrew comes from the National Taxpayers Union Foundation. He's the director of state policy over there. And Andrew's actually, he's a researcher and he's an author of many opinion editorials. He's been published, get this, in Forbes, USA Today, Investors Business Daily, The Bulwark, and National Review, as well as a ton of other outlets. This is a national expert on state policy. Andrew, thanks for being with us today.
Andrew, thanks for having me on.
When we talk about state policy and how it affects where people live, some folks are tuned into this, some folks are not. And so for our viewers and listeners, I just kind of want to give you a quick orientation. In Pennsylvania, we're losing population. So we're actually seeing every 24 minutes or so, someone else moves out of Pennsylvania. I want to say in the last year, it was about 54,000 or so people moved out of the state of Pennsylvania. We're on track to lose another congressional district. And it's a staggering dynamic because when you think about it, Pennsylvania, we're geographically, we're the center of the East Coast. We're the birthplace of American freedom. We're the home of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, the great Steel City, the great city of brotherly love. We're the home of the place where the coal industry started and gave birth to the first industrial revolution, where the oil industry started in Titusville, gave birth to the second industrial revolution, or I should say powered those industrial revolutions. So here we are, arguably positioned to be the leading state in the nation for opportunity and prosperity, and yet we've got someone moving out of here every 24 minutes. It's astounding. And so I just want to talk about how public policy actually shapes those decisions. I've talked to two people just in the last few weeks or so, and both of them mentioned wanting to move from Pennsylvania specifically to Florida. So Andrew, talk to me. What are the policies when you look at the states where people are moving out of? And the top states, by the way, include California and New York. You've done a lot of research on this. You've done a lot of writing on it. Talk to me. Why? Why are people moving out of these states?
Well, I mean, it's not going to shock you when you say I work in tax policy, and the biggest reason that we can consistently point to for these trends at the broader level. I think it's important to note that on the individual level, people might move because of family, or they might move because they their job moved or something like that. But on the broadest possible level, it's taxes, and specifically the income tax. The individual income tax is the biggest predictor. And you might say, oh well, Pennsylvania has a flat low tax rate, but then there's the local taxes that factor in. The states that we're seeing people move to, Florida, Texas, Tennessee, these are all states with no income tax. And that just has been such a massive draw in these these consistent trends that we're seeing of people moving south for the tax winter, as it were.
It's so interesting because, and I'd be curious to get your take on this. People in government who are proponents of higher taxes, they say, well, we've got to fund the government, right? So we got to raise these taxes is what they say. This is them saying this, that they've got to raise the taxes to keep revenues high, to pay for government services. But what we actually see is in these states with those high tax rates, you actually have these deficits. Now I'm wondering, these states with the lower tax rates where everyone seems to be moving to, what does the deficit versus surplus situation look like with those governments?
I mean, in Florida already has no income tax, and they've been spending the past few years talking about how they're going to get rid of the property tax.
So they're doubling down on this, less taxes. So would you say it's fair to say
they
that
have the room.
would you say it's fair to say that the states with the lower taxes are actually enjoying more economic surpluses than these states that are kind of raising up taxes and driving people out of the state?
Yeah, and we have the data for it. I mean, we estimate that for this, for this year, states like California is going to lose about $4 billion in state and local revenue from people moving out. And Florida is going to gain about $4 billion in state and local revenue. And when you think about how that compounds year after year, because the people who leave, they don't just stop paying taxes in that one year. They're not paying taxes in that state year after year after year. So you can sort of see how that builds upon itself. And becomes, causes states like California, New York to sort of end up kind of circling the drain, because they end up, the only solution they have is to raise taxes on the people who are left, which in turn pushes those people out faster. So it's kind of a vicious cycle there.
Man, it is a vicious cycle. I want to talk about New York in a minute, but I'm wondering, have you done any research on these millionaire taxes? So Massachusetts has enacted one. I think California has been debating one where the rationale is where these people are saying, hey, if we take a certain income level, we're going to tax you more, and therefore we're going to have plenty of money for government services. Does it actually work out that way? What is actually happening in the states with the millionaire taxes?
I mean, it's the same story. I mean, you mentioned California. California's been having budget problems year after year. They're talking about there's going to be quite possibly a ballot measure to institute a wealth tax, which is more than just a millionaire's tax. Millionaire's tax is a higher income tax rate on millionaires. A wealth tax is we take your entire net worth, so the value of your house, your investments, all that, and try and tax that. You also mentioned Washington. Washington currently doesn't have an income tax. They're expressly prohibited in the state constitution from having one, but that didn't stop legislators from passing a 9.9% income tax, going from 0% to 9.9%, starting in a couple of years. So that's these states, they continue to have the same problem. I mean, and I think New Jersey is illustrative of this, because New Jersey at one point didn't have an income tax, or didn't have property tax, I believe. And the justification for enacting a property tax was, oh, well, we're going to start paring down the income tax. And now New Jersey just has high income taxes and high property taxes. So both. that's what
they got getting. Doubly bad. They didn't improve at all.
Exactly. Right.
That's awful. So are you watching at all what's happening in New York City specifically? So we've got the new mayor there, Mayor Mamdani. He's out there. At first, I think it was supposed to be free groceries and government-run grocery stores. We're going to help everybody out. And now suddenly there's these draconian initiatives. Talk to us about what's happening in New York City.
Well, now in New York, you have Governor Hochul is quite literally begging millionaires to come back to the state.
They've driven people away. They've driven the people who are actually driving the economy, paying the taxes. They've driven them out of the city and state there.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, New York City, the problem is only going to get worse. I mean, we're seeing tons of increases in real estate inquiries in Miami Beach because of all these New York City millionaires who are trying to run for the hills. And I think this also gets to an important point about how tax policy influences these decisions, because I think you'll often hear when a new tax is proposed, say a 2% increase, 2% surtax on millionaires. The advocates for it will say, oh, well, what's 2% of a millionaire's wealth? Or their income. That's nothing. They're not going to move because of that. And I think the point is that, taxpayers aren't stupid. They can see the writing on the wall. And when year after year, all that's being discussed is, oh, we have a budget shortfall. We need millionaires to pay a little bit more of their fair share. Oh, we have another one. We need to add a new tax. And then you look at states like Florida, where they're, and all throughout the South. I mean, it's trying to get up. The states that still have an income tax are trying to get to zero. And the states that that don't have an income tax are trying to stay there. And, if you're a taxpayer, which state would you rather live in? Would you rather live in the one that's going to keep coming back to you with the collection basket every single year, or do you want to live in the one that is trying to lower your taxes and use your tax dollars responsibly? I think it's a pretty easy question.
So well said. When you look at Pennsylvania, so let's just talk about Pennsylvania as a state, and I want to hear some of the insights that you've gained through your research. And it's such a good point. A lot of these people that are looking at these states enacting these wealth tax and the millionaires tax, when you allow bureaucrats to decide what a fair share is, or decide, hey, we're going to subjectively decide which income limits now need these massively excessive taxes, suddenly you're going to have these bureaucrats coming for you in very short order. And I think you tapped on something insightful there, which is people are smart. They get that. They see that. They can see it coming. And so that's why a lot of them are choosing to leave the states they're in. And these horrible policies are turning places like New York City into ghost towns. I mean, you've got what used to be, economic powerhouses as part of the American story now are becoming ghost towns because of policies that are driving innovators out. So let's talk about Pennsylvania. What are the insights that you've gained from the policies we have? Let's talk about the good first. What are some good things about Pennsylvania? And then let's talk about where we can improve.
Well, the biggest good thing you have going for you is that you're not New York, which, there is a relative aspect to this because, even if your state is number 41 or 42 compared to number 50, you're better. So Pennsylvania gains people from New York every single year.
It's such a low bar, Andrew. I feel like of all things you could have picked to tell us we're not New York it's not a positive. It's not a positive. It's so bad.
Well, the point I'm making is that it means that you are still, in these sort of migration wars. Okay. You're gaining from those states.
Sure.
You're gaining from New Jersey. And, I think that at the state level, the income tax it's low, it's flat. Those are good policies.
And to give our viewers, just so you know, and a lot of Pennsylvanians, they're just not even paying much attention. When he says flat, we have what's called the uniformity clause in our Constitution that says nobody based on income can get a different tax rate when it comes to the state income tax. That's why we've got a low, flat income tax across PA. All right, keep going.
Right, which makes a difference because, again, I think when you're in a state where you're constantly the one targeted, you're a millionaire, you're constantly, every single year, the state is saying we need to raise taxes on millionaires, the fact that, a flat tax has the advantage of someone knowing, even if the state is going to raise your rate, that they're not just bilking you for what you've earned. It's at least, the responsibility is at least shared among the general public. So that does make a difference. But I think, it's really the fact that when you add in those local income tax rates, the tax is still quite high.
Thanks for tuning in to Freedom Rising, a podcast from the Commonwealth Foundation, Pennsylvania's free market think tank. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you get notified when a new episode drops. Now let's get back to the interview. I'm joined today by two colleagues from the Commonwealth Foundation, our Chief Policy Officer, Nathan Benefield. Nate, thanks for being with us.
Andrew.
And also our Vice President of Policy, Elizabeth Stelle, who joins from the Home Office. Liz, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. So we're here to talk about Pennsylvania and how to make us more competitive. I just talked to Andrew Wilford. He's out there at the National Taxpayers Union Foundation. And for those of our viewers who are listening, he didn't pay high compliments to Pennsylvania. So guys, I asked him, I said, what are some things we're doing well? And he said, you're not New York. And that's like the lowest possible bar. It's like, yeah, it's not a great compliment. So, but he referenced the uniformity clause and the fact that we have a flat tax. But we talked about the migration out of our state, and you've referenced the U-Haul report, and Liz, I know you've talked and written about this as well. We've got a lot of people moving out of Pennsylvania. So every 24 or so minutes, somebody's leaving the state. But I think the good news for our audience, I think of this as the good news segment because we've got good things we're doing in Pennsylvania. We've got good policy wins that have happened. You guys have been fighting in this fight for many years. And so before we talk about the bad things, let's talk about some of the good things about Pennsylvania. I guess my message to our audience is we're going to change the game in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is going to become the leading state for opportunity and prosperity. And there's policies we can and will put into place to make that happen. By we, I just mean the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as a state. And so, Nate, let me hear from you. And then, Liz, I want to hear your thoughts on some of the good things here. What are some wins you've seen over the past few years? What are some great things about the state?
Yeah, we'll start that Pennsylvania has gotten better.
Yeah,
so you mentioned some of those rankings. It used to always be that Pennsylvania was at the bottom, like 48th, 49th on all of these rankings from job growth, income growth, out-migration growth. We've moved up. We're not New York. We're not as in the state of Illinois or California. We're middle of the pack. Now, we're not trying to be middle of the pack.
Yeah.
It's not good enough. But we've made a lot of progress towards that being more competitive. And some of it is driven by good policies that we've been able to get done. We passed a few years ago reduction in our corporate income tax rate. We used to be the second highest in the country. In fact, before the recent federal tax cuts, it was the second highest tax rate in the industrialized world.
Oh, wow.
Like Pennsylvania is the second worst place to do
Yikes.
business. But we've passed legislation that would, over 10 years, reduce that from being second highest to being 13th lowest.
Oh, that's great.
That's moving in the right direction. We have practiced some fiscal conservatism, responsibility, and not spent down all of our emergency reserves, not raised taxes. We defeated under the last couple governors a number of proposed tax increases that would have cost Pennsylvanians about $33 billion. But we fought that back and rebuilt our emergency reserves. Again, that was where we were second worst in the country. In this case, only to Illinois in terms of how much we had in our reserves. A few years ago, we had enough in those reserves that if there was a recession, we had enough money to run the government for about 3 hours. Now we have enough for about 55 days, better than the national average, making big strides in that. And then just last year, we blocked a carbon tax and what's called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. A lot of our northeastern neighbor states and Virginia just re-entered that, which was a carbon tax. And those states have had a reduction in how much electricity they're producing. Here in Pennsylvania, we're the number one exporter of electricity. We are producing more power here. So we've made our state more competitive due to some of these good policy changes. And we need to continue that progress and need to keep on that path forward.
That's a great, so I think our audience, a lot of times you hear a lot of the doom and gloom about, the things Pennsylvania gets wrong because, we have such huge potential as a state due to our geographic position and our natural resources and the people and everything that we have, we're positioned to be a top state in the nation. And so we see ourselves held back a lot by bad policies. And so we complain about that a lot. But what Nate brings up is there are some good things. Liz, what are your thoughts here? What are some other ways we've seen Pennsylvania actually trending in the right direction?
Yeah, well, I think it's important not to overlook the good policies that we've been able to maintain. It's twofold, right? Protecting the good policies we have and advancing new good policies. So the fact that we've maintained a flat personal income tax that's relatively low is really important. That said, we're under a lot of competition in this space. If you look at what's happening in other states, there's been over 16 states that have reduced their personal income tax since 2021, right? So that low rate is going to look less and less attractive as other states continue to lower their taxes. So we have to continue to be competitive, looking not just at, what's Pennsylvania doing right now, but what's everyone around us doing. And like Nate said, the goal isn't New York. The goal is Florida. The goal is Texas. The goal is North Carolina, all the places that Pennsylvanians are fleeing to. The other good thing we have going on in Pennsylvania is we're finally recognizing that we have too much red tape, that we overregulate our industries, and we're losing a lot of opportunity because of that. So we're beginning to see some steps, positive steps in that direction to reduce the red tape. We have a long, long way to go. But it's really encouraging to see recognition across the board, Democrats, Republicans, everyone, that, it's too difficult to do business in this state.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Liz, because if you look right across the border in Ohio, they have a much friendlier regulatory climate, and we're seeing a lot of investment going into Ohio that could and should be coming into Pennsylvania. Talk a little bit about that. What are some differences between Ohio and Pennsylvania? And I'm glad we're recognizing as a state, hey, let's reduce the red tape. And what are some ways we can be better?
Yeah. So for starters, the regulatory reduction, reducing the timeline that it takes to get a permit in Pennsylvania versus Ohio. In Ohio, developers are measuring their timeline in weeks, maybe months. Sometimes in Pennsylvania, permits take years. And there's no certainty to when they'll get an answer, if they'll get an answer, some people will just say, I just want a yes or a no. Even if the answer is no, I need to know. And the longer we take, the more time their capital is tied up. So the speed of the regulatory environment is really important. Another thing that Ohio hasn't dealt with, the Reggie tax that Nate mentioned. For 6+ years, we were dealing with this potential carbon tax that drove a lot of investment across the border to Ohio. So those are two examples, but there are lots of other things too that make Ohio and places that are lowering their tax burden more attractive. I think, what other thing I would point to is just the fact that there's a different mindset. In Ohio, the regulators ask, how can we help you? How can we work with you to stay compliant? In Pennsylvania, depending on which region you're talking about, it's a very different conversation. It's more of a gotcha game.
So it's like a
And
hostility
that really
versus interesting.
Yes, it makes a huge difference in attracting capital, jobs, investment.
That's a great point. So because like these innovators, these job creators, the people investing into these communities, that investment's resulting in jobs. It's resulting in infrastructure. It's resulting in better roads. So if anything, the government officials there should be saying, thank you. Thank you for coming to our area. How can we make life easier? But instead, from what we've seen and what you're saying, in Pennsylvania, too often it's more of a hostile, we're going to get you with this one technicality on the permit application and kick it to the bottom of the stack and you're never going to get your permit. Absolutely awful.
And on the other side, there's no accountability for the regulators. So that's where we're beginning to see some progress, right? Like you have a timeline. If you don't submit this permit, approve it or deny it in a certain timeline, there are consequences. The favorite thing that Pennsylvania did last year, which is really encouraging, they started implementing deemed approved. It's just for people permits right now. But it's this idea that if you get to that timeline, that deadline, and you don't get an answer, you are automatically approved. And that's what it should be. It should be an assumption of yes, not, here are 10,000 reasons to say no.
I'm glad you brought up deemed approved because that is, I was starting to go back to the negative. And I think you really brought it back to what the focus is for this moment, which is the positive. And I think that's a big one. So deemed approved is something that's huge for us. Some of these wins you talked about, the C&I, the corporate net income tax, coming down, basically dropping in half over a course of a couple of years. So a lot of good things happening in Pennsylvania where we're righting the ship, we're turning in the right direction, but we've got a little bit of a threat on the horizon with a budget that's been proposed this year that would kind of drain our rainy day fund quite a bit. Let's talk about that threat, and then let's talk about how we're going to counter the threat and go back in the right direction. So we've talked a little bit about the good things. We've got some great things. Nate, give us a little overview on the budget and the budget proposal that Governor Shapiro brought forward, what that would do to us from a deficit, future tax hike standpoint. Then, Liz, I'm going to come back to you to talk about some of the proactive solutions as we put together our Better PA platform and how do we counter this threat and how do we keep Pennsylvania on a better track?
Yeah. Well, what the governor has come on and proposed was a massive spending increase.
Okay.
Especially increasing over last year, which is already running a deficit. We're already spending more than we're bringing in revenue. He's got several proposals in terms of revenue this year, which is a tax legalizing and taxing marijuana, taxing seal games, and then something called combined reporting, which is a very complicated scheme to try and make corporations pay more. So we made our tax rate more competitive, but he wants to make it harder for corporations to do business in Pennsylvania with this tax proposal. And then even that does not balance the budget. He wants to drain those reserves. We talked about the emergency reserves, which are literally set aside for these can only be touched in cases of emergency or recession. He says, well, let's use them now. I just want to spend it now. So draining that and then not bringing budget into balance, which is going to require then massive tax hikes to keep paying for his spending in the future. We estimate, based on how much he's spending, it would take about $2,100 per family of four in terms of tax increases to pay for his spending. And that takes us back in the wrong direction, undoing all the progress we've made in terms of making Pennsylvania more competitive, makes us less competitive and will continue to drive people away to other states.
See, I think this kind of confuses our audience a little bit because we have a balanced budget provision. We're required as the state of Pennsylvania to have a balanced budget. And what you're talking about is a deficit, and this would be equivalent to a family household where you're spending more than your income, but the next year you're like, well, I'm going to even spend more, but I'm just going to get a couple odd jobs. I don't know how much they pay, but I hope they'll cover it. That's kind of the equivalent. How can he get away with it?
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, the requirement of having a balanced budget is revenue plus how much you have in the account. So basically it's like, hey, this is how much I have in income, but I also have my checking account. Let me drain my checking account this year on these things and spend more money. And then, you know what, I set aside this money for emergency, for kids' tuition for college. I'm gonna take that. And
drain
spend
that
too.
and just keep spending more.
And then I'll figure out how to spend the year after that and how to keep these things going. And it's basically having money in your checking account, so taking out a higher mortgage.
That doesn't seem like a rational approach.
It does not, but you got to think of in terms of the political mindset. The governor's not going to be here that much longer. He maybe gets a second term, maybe he runs for president, but it's always about the next election. So spending the money now before the election and deal with the consequences later. And that's how a lot of these things happen in terms of budgeting. It's not thinking about the future. It's thinking about how do I do things right now in this year only?
Well, for those of you who follow you on X, we've seen the back and forth with the governor's office on the tax hike claim. So his office claims this will not result in a tax hike. Your analysis shows it will. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so first, his definition of tax hikes excludes the 3 tax hikes he's proposed. Those don't count as tax hikes. They're not real tax hikes. And then in terms of how are we paying for it in the future? One is draining all of the reserves, and then he does show he has to show by law a 5-year outlook. Okay. What are we doing in the future? And in the future, he says we're going after this year's budget, increasing spending by 6%, we're going to freeze spending the next year, and freeze spending the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that.
Okay.
So in the future, we're
going to
be fiscally
we won't keep spending more money. We're going to drain our savings. We're going to drain our checking. We're going to hopefully get some smoke and mirror marijuana taxes to cover our increase, but we promise we'll keep it there.
Yes.
Okay.
So very, very unrealistic. Yes.
Very dubious.
Especially since he's not proposing anything that would actually control the rate of spending. He's just saying, and I think we'll just freeze spending after this year.
Oh my goodness! I feel like his team has not done a real good job learning math, basic math.
Well, they're very good at learning politics and how to talk on Twitter. Yeah.
It's political math. So Liz, so you're very tuned into this. Talk to us a little bit about how do we neutralize this? So there's this threat in Pennsylvania. You have a governor who, whether it's political ambition or whatever the case is, or just being informed by a team who didn't do well in math. How do we push back and get a reasonable, rational plan in Pennsylvania that's going to continue or put us on a good trajectory as a state?
Well, it's really important to slow the spend. When we talk about responsible budget, we're not talking about slashing and burning, 10% cuts across the board. Although, I could argue that wouldn't be a bad idea. We're talking about slowing the growth in spending. It's an incremental approach. It's a common sense approach. And the ultimate goal is making sure that our state spending is growing with our economy and not faster than our economy. There's no reason that state government should be growing faster than your income. And that's why we championed something called the Taxpayer Protection Act. And what it does is it puts a restriction on the growth in spending and saying you can grow the spending every year, but only in proportion with inflation and population growth. That protects against this structural deficit spending that Nate's talking about. It protects us against tax hikes year over year. It protects us against, really bad policies, not just like taxes that will never come to fruition, but like borrowing schemes, driving up our liabilities and our debt. And let's be honest, debt is just tax hikes on our kids. And, we talk all the time about making Pennsylvania a place that families want to live and work in. And older Pennsylvanians, I talk to them all the time. They're like, I just want my kids to come back to Pennsylvania. I want them to have opportunity in Pennsylvania. And when we're doing this deficit spending, when we're doing these big borrowing programs like Governor Shapiro's SITES program, what we're doing is saying we're going to tax our kids to get something today. And that's just not bad policy. It's immoral. And those are the types of things that Commonwealth Foundation is fighting against every day to make Pennsylvania more competitive.
That's fantastic. So there are real solutions that can be not just advocated for, but enacted that would keep us or put us on a good trajectory. I say keep because we are making some good reforms. You talked about the different things that we're doing. And Liz, you talked about the regulatory reduction, which is fantastic. But to kind of continue and even improve that to get us on the right track, there are things we can do. You talked about the Taxpayer Protection Act. And I remember, I know Commonwealth Foundation has been advocating for TPA for many years. I remember, for those of you who don't know, I was in the legislature and my first full year was in 2019. And in 2019, had we enacted TPA, and I remember a number of us were pushing diligently to get it done, but Nate, where would we be right now versus 2019? Had we enacted TPA in 2019, where would we be in terms of spending today?
Well, we wouldn't have to be dealing with some of these issues we're dealing with now of spending more than revenue. We would have been able to keep that into balance. And what the trend has always been is, the temptation to spend money in good times, spend everything, and then when there is a recession, it's all right, now we have to go back and raise taxes. In that since 2019 office, we had the pandemic, but we had so much federal money coming in, and there was so much then increased spending because of that. And now the lawmakers and the government are looking like, well, now we have to keep spending at that level, keep inflating some of our programs that, we would be able to put more money back in people's pockets had we kept spending just in line with the rate of inflation. And that's, we could be having personal income tax reductions to be more competitive. We could accelerate those corporate tax rate reductions to do it now, to be more competitive and attract people to move back into Pennsylvania, businesses to move back into Pennsylvania, had we enacted those spending restraints a few years back.
You're talking about billions of dollars, basically, is
yes,
the difference.
Absolutely, billions of dollars in terms of that spending difference. And I don't think a lot of people realize how much we have grown spending above and beyond the rate of inflation and above and beyond people's personal incomes. Like the government has grown much faster than your family income has in Pennsylvania.
See, I think this is exciting because our viewers often are concerned about the direction of Pennsylvania, rightfully so. As I said, we're a state that should be top state, and instead we're sometimes ranking very low in a lot of the competitive type scores in rankings. But when it comes to the Taxpayer Protection Act, it's important to understand this is something that can be done. It needs to be passed through a constitutional amendment. It's got to go through 2 sessions of the legislature, and then it goes to the people for a vote. The governor doesn't have to sign it. So you really have this real opportunity that legislators can take advantage of to pass an initiative that would have saved us billions of dollars just if you had done it in 2019. Because like you were saying, Nate, once the government spends $1, they're not going to go back to not spending that $1. They're going to keep that expense in place. They're going to build on it. The government doesn't know how to just spend reasonably.
Yeah, I think it was Ronald Reagan who said that there's nothing as permanent in life as a government program.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, you're spot on. Liz, what do you think? How do we get TPA done?
Oh man, it can be done. And if you question that, just remember Colorado has a version of this, and not exactly a bastion of conservative politics these days, but that has endured because people in the 90s in Colorado made it a priority. So it can absolutely be done in Pennsylvania, but it's going to take, I think, focus. The legislature has to decide they want to make this a priority, a number one ask to get it done. And like you said, 2 sessions. So you have to have continuity there. But it's something that's passed in both chambers before, not at the same time, but in both chambers. And so I think we have a precedent there to do this. And I'm hopeful that this year's more difficult budget discussion, the realization that we're running into some big deficits now that we don't know how to fill, will help encourage and motivate people to get serious about some structural reform. That's what we call it TPA. It's a structural reform. We're changing the structure, the process of government. This isn't something that can just go away next year. It's going to be a permanent feature of budgeting in Pennsylvania. And that's going to strengthen us. That's going to strengthen our state, make it resilient to future emergencies, recessions, all those things that then can have real life negative consequences on people. But there's lots of other things we can do too on the spending side. We have way too many people in our welfare programs, for instance, more than we had before the pandemic. We need to do some work there. That's the number one driver of state spending in Pennsylvania.
So tell me, Liz, tell us just what's one, so I love our audience to know kind of concrete things. Hey, what's a glimmer of hope of like a concrete thing that if we got done, it would make this change in my state? And we talked about Taxpayer Protection Act. I think that's a big one. It's probably one of the biggest ones that would have a massive shift. Give us one thing on the welfare reform that you've been working on that would do another shift for Pennsylvania in the right direction.
There are so many opportunities on this side, especially given what the federal government has done. really keeping states accountable for making sure these programs serve the people that they were designed to serve in the first place. Crazy concept, but we sort of drift away from those missions. One thing that I'd love to see done in Pennsylvania is getting serious about verification of eligibility. Saying, okay, we're going to put it in state law. Every 6 months, you have to check and make sure that you're still eligible for Medicaid, you're still eligible for food stamps. And if you're not, great, you now have enough income to be independent. You don't need to rely on state taxpayers anymore. If we got serious about that, we would really impact positively all of the fraud, waste, abuse issues that you see talked about in the news. It starts with eligibility in our programs.
And that's, yeah, go
I can
ahead.
just let me know. We made some progress on that last year that was passed within the state budget. A few kind of small steps, but it was asking the departments to share things like death records. We had death records over here, welfare records over here. They weren't talking to each other. But now they're saying, hey, this person died. Maybe you should remove them from the welfare rolls. They weren't before. Like, they was literally like the auditors would go in and find that, hey, there are people who are still getting payments that died years ago.
Unbelievable.
They'll check if did you move out of state? Did you win the lottery? We're actually going to share some of those records between state agencies so they can say, if you won the lottery and are now a billionaire, maybe you shouldn't be getting food stamps anymore.
So they did that. They started
doing that.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So there are some real concrete things. Now the verification makes sense, Liz, and that sounds like a very bipartisan. I mean, that sounds like something that everybody would get behind. Do you think it's doable?
It's doable. It's going to take some work. There is a lot of resistance to this. People who are concerned that folks who are eligible will fall through the cracks because they won't be able to handle, the paperwork or the processes that the department needs to go through to verify. But with technology, there are so many ways we can innovate and streamline this. And in fact, they're being forced to do that right now with work requirements for a lot of these programs. So I think you're going to see a huge boon in innovation in this sector, which is sorely needed because, I can't think of a better place to invest in infrastructure than making sure that our benefits that are, expensive but really important are going to those people who actually need them. Because we need more workers in Pennsylvania. I mean, that's the bottom line. And this is going to help us achieve a healthier, independent, thriving workforce.
That's a great point. So Nate, I have a question for you on education. But just to recap, so we've got two big things. We've got the Taxpayer Protection Act. We've got a verification initiative for welfare benefits. Nate, let's talk education because a lot of these states, we're talking about people unfortunately moving out of Pennsylvania in too many cases, and they're going to places like Texas and Florida and Arizona and these other states. What does the educational landscape look like in those states, and does that factor into families' decision to ultimately leave PA?
Yeah, absolutely. That the educational environment, especially having educational options for families, is driving a lot of the decisions and where people move. And you've seen, and Pennsylvania has also made a lot of progress in this front. We have a tax credit scholarship program. We've tripled the amount that's available under that since 2020. And in terms of actual number of students being served, as of 2024, only 2 other states were serving more people because of our size and the impact of that. But some of the other states that have gone above and beyond have universal school choice, which means, number one, it's direct funding, like funding that follows the child. Instead of simply saying you have to go to the school that is assigned by your address and by your zip code, money will follow you and you can choose the best school for your kids. And then it is universal, meaning like this is for everyone. And this is what Florida and Arizona, they are the 2 biggest leaders on this, have seen hundreds of thousands, even millions of students taking advantage of these programs. And there are states that have seen their test scores and academic achievement increase, both those students who are receiving scholarships and those in public school. There was a study just came out about, hey, Florida public schools improved because of having that competition, because of having that choice, because of having smaller class size in the public schools and more resources available through educational choice. Texas is the newest example. They have a new universal program beginning this year. I just saw numbers that they have almost 250,000 students who have signed up for that in just a few months that the program is being rolled out. Almost about 5% of all Texas students are trying to get into that program. So there's such demand from parents for having educational options that they can choose the best school for their kids.
It's a true democratizing of education where parents can literally choose what works best for their kid. And I've heard of households, one kid's in public school, one kid's in private school, one kid's homeschooled, so uniquely for that child's needs. And that you feel like is also driving some of these move decisions.
Absolutely, and even new types of models developing. You hear a lot about things called micro schools, which are very small schools tailored to a community of parents who say, hey, my kid just needs something that's a little bit different. Maybe it's almost like the one-room schoolhouse again, of having 10, 20 kids in the area in a very small school, and perhaps some of the learnings are online, it's customized and tailored. There can be so much more when parents are in control and you're not just told, you have to go to this school because this is your zip code.
That's a great point. Liz, as we wrap up here on the educational front, so when it comes to specific policies, we've got TPA, we've got verification. What's the one thing in Pennsylvania that the governor can do this year to really advance educational freedom and educational opportunity here in Pennsylvania?
Oh man, there are so many options, but there are a couple that we're really focused on here at Commonwealth Nation. The number one is making sure the governor opts into the federal tax credit scholarship program. So this is something that Congress passed in July. It would allow anyone to donate to a scholarship program, and 100%, they get 100% of that deduction from your taxes. So what that means is that people all across Pennsylvania could now donate through tax deduction to, the Catholic school in their neighborhood, the school they graduated from, maybe even like a YMCA after school program, keeping that money local instead of sending it to Washington, D.C., which is fantastic. The other thing that we're looking at is, continuing to expand those scholarship programs that Nate was talking about. They're so beneficial. They save us money. The students do better. The parents want them. And year after year after year, we have to turn away tens of thousands of applications because we have more people who want to use those scholarships than scholarship money available because of caps set by the legislature. So those are two things that Pennsylvania could do, in a few months to really maximize education choice for every Pennsylvania family.
Outstanding. So we've got 4 excellent initiatives here: Taxpayer Protection Act, verification, Governor Shapiro needs to opt into the federal scholarship tax credit program, and we need to increase our Pennsylvania tax credit scholarship programs as well. Nate, Liz, thanks for being with me today. Your insight and analysis has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Pennsylvania's future depends on how well it can compete for families and businesses against growing states like Florida and Texas. We need to grow our economy, attract more young people to move here, and provide more opportunities for future generations through educational choice. I believe we can make Pennsylvania the top state for opportunity and prosperity, but it's going to take all of us working together to make it happen. We'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, this has been Freedom Rising, and I'm Andrew Lewis. Thanks for watching.